Test.
Testing, testing. 1, 2, 3. Testing.
I think we're good.
Is that okay?
Yeah. Okay. So, good afternoon, everyone. This is Michelle Gramolia, the CEO here at Woodland Pond. I was contacted on Saturday by Dr. Feiner and George and Nora Brown to talk about the idea that maybe today we could spend a few minutes remembering John Lewis. And I thought it was a fantastic idea. You know, this is someone that was an absolute pioneer with social justice reform and civil rights reform, you know, as one of the original freedom riders and one of the 6 primary organizers of the March on Washington, and then as well the march, you know, in Selma to Selma. John Lewis was on the forefront as a very young man, incidentally. Having been born in 1940, this is somebody that in 1963 was only 23 years old. And he often gets recognized for being, you know, one of the youngest and earliest advocates for, you know, civil justice and civil rights. And I think that the United States has lost really a remarkable figure. And I think as we look at what we can do, you know, I've explained already that I have a desire to do more. And I think that we can all take our lead from John Lewis. And if you haven't familiarized yourself with, you know, his efforts and what he's done, this is a great time to do it. You know, we don't have a million things going on right now. He's a fascinating figure that was driven to do more for society, for his peers, and as well the country as a whole. And I think that we can all take inspiration from that. So I thought today would be a great day to honor him, and as well his compatriot, remind me the name.
C.T. Vivian.
C.T. Vivian, yes. That likewise did a significant amount of work and was recognized as, you know, according to Barack Obama, the best pastor, I think, of all time, is what he said, greatest pastor of all time. So I'm going to turn this over to George Brown, and he'd like to spend some time talking to you a little bit about Mr. Lewis.
Thanks so much, Michelle, for that introduction. Indeed, we initially, June and I and Nora thought it would be important to have a deeper opportunity to honor and remember John Lewis, and particularly because he touched our lives, June and mine, and to some degree Nora's, in his early work in the 1960s. And we should also recognize that he has spent 30 years in Congress as a representative from Georgia, and was known as the moral conscience of the Congress, as Nancy Pelosi has described him, and has been, in his last months of his life, he was in close touch and supporter and mentor of the Black Lives Movement. So his career, his 80 years expanded a full range of the efforts to alleviate all the negative aspects of racism and injustice on the Black people in this country, and has been a force beyond recognition. My own sort of initial recognition of John was in fact, in May 1961, which was the first day of the Freedom Rides. I think most of everyone knows the Freedom Rides in general, but they started with only 13 riders taking commercial buses into the Deep South in May 1961. They were representative of this mostly Southern people, but they were from different states, Black and white, male and female. And John was one of the 2 youngest on the bus at age, I think at that time, age 21. This was perhaps the most heroic, other than going into the battle in World War II, I think this is just about the most heroic physical act that one could imagine, getting on those buses and knowing that angry crowds of white supremacists was ready to meet them all along the way in each bus stop, at each bus terminal, in each city, going uh, from South Carolina into Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi, with the intention of getting to New Orleans. Actually, they never got there by bus, but they were totally, one of the two buses was torched and burned out. They were beaten heavily, especially at the end in Montgomery and in Jackson, Mississippi. And John Lewis himself was beaten unconscious. I think it was in Jackson. And the police stayed away and let the Ku Klux Klan and the other supremacist groups have a field day at beating up these unarmed individuals trying to have integration of the interstate transport system, which had been decreed by the Supreme Court prior to that. So I won't go into any more detail on that, except to say that that was an inspiration for me. The Freedom Riders has always remained in my mind as the most important and heroic group early in the civil rights movement to achieve what it achieved, and do so with incredible bravery and unrelenting moral power. I will want to turn over to June, who had even more direct experience through the more well-known Selma marches for voting rights. Am I correct, June, in 1965, a few years later. And you will also say some more about John's career, which from the Freedom Rides went way beyond into the civil liberties prospect. He became the president of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, known as SNCC, and then later became, as I say, a congressman from Georgia for over 30 years. So June, let me turn it over to you, and then I'll ask Nora to say a few words as well.
Okay. My experience with John Lewis was not a direct one, but he was very much a part of all the activity in both 64 and 65. In 64, I was in the South just for a couple of weeks during Freedom Summer in Greenwood, Mississippi. And I think it was around that time that John Lewis came on as the head of SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And I would have seen him at meetings. I would have seen him preaching in the churches. He was a fine preacher. And although it says in one of the obits that he wasn't such a great orator, but people seem to think he was pretty wonderful. And then again in 65 with the big marches, I was not there for the first march, the Bloody Sunday March. But of course I read about it, and that's probably one of the reasons that I went to Selma in time for the second march, and was very much a participant in that. And John was up there in the front with Dr. King and with C.T. Vivian. I'll say a few words about C.T. Vivian also. So John came really through SCLC, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, after his initial work with the Freedom Riders. But then he branched out and did many, many other things. So I thought I would just read a little bit from the obituary. And if you go onto the web, you can find his full obituary in the New York Times, both his and that of C.T. Vivian. And then the other thing, again, I won't go into any detail, a new documentary has just been released called Good Trouble, which is part of a quote of his. And we're hoping that we will be able to show it at 3 o'clock on Wednesday, and that will give you every little detail of his life. So again, I'll just read a few little bits from the obituary from the Times. Representative John Lewis, a son of sharecroppers and an apostle of nonviolence who was bloodied at Selma and across the Jim Crow South in the historic struggle for racial equality, and who then carried a mantle of moral authority into Congress, died on Friday. He was 80. So it says that more than a half a century later, after the killing in May of George Floyd, a black man in police custody in Minneapolis, Mr. Lewis welcomed the resulting global demonstrations against police killings of black people and more broadly against systemic racism in many corners of society. He saw those protests as a continuation of his life's work, though his illness had left him to watch from the sidelines. This is a quote from him. "It was very moving to see hundreds of thousands of people from all over America and around the world take to the streets to speak up, to speak out, to get into what I call good trouble," Mr. Lewis told CBS This Morning in June. "This looks and feels so different," he said, of Black Lives Matter movement, which drove the anti-racism demonstrations. "It is so much more massive and all-inclusive." He added, "There will be no turning back." He gained a reputation for having an almost mystical faith in his own survivability. One civil rights activist who knew him well told the New York Times in 1976, "Some leaders, even the toughest, would occasionally finesse a situation where they knew they were going to be beaten or jailed. John never did that. He always went full force into the fray." Mr. Lewis was arrested 40 times from 1960 to 1966. He was repeatedly beaten senseless by Southern policemen and freelance hoodlums. During the Freedom Rides in 1961, he was left unconscious in a pool of his own blood outside the Greyhound bus terminal in Montgomery, Alabama, after he and others were attacked by hundreds of white people. He spent countless days and nights in county jails and 31 days in Mississippi's notoriously brutal Parchman Penitentiary. Once he was in Congress, Mr. Lewis voted with the most liberal Democrats, although he also showed an independent streak. In his quest to build what Dr. King called the beloved community, a world without poverty, racism, or war, Mr. Lewis adopted the phrase. He regularly voted against military spending. He opposed the Persian Gulf War of 1991 and the North American Free Trade Agreement, which was signed in 92. He refused to take part in the Million Man March in Washington in 1995, saying that statements made by the organizer, Louis Farrakhan, leader of the Nation of Islam, were divisive and bigoted. In 2001, Mr. Lewis skipped the inauguration of George W. Bush, saying he thought that Mr. Bush, who had become president after the Supreme Court halted a final vote recount in Florida, had not been truly elected. In 2017, he boycotted Mr. Trump's inauguration, questioning the legitimacy of his presidency because of evidence that Russia had meddled in the 2016 election on Mr. Trump's behalf. So his little phrase that George was also going to read at the end of this, this is a direct quote. He put this on Twitter in 2018. "Do not get lost in a sea of despair. Be hopeful. Be optimistic. Our struggle is not the struggle of a day, a week, a month, or a year. It is the struggle of a lifetime. Never, ever be afraid to make noise and get in good trouble, necessary trouble." So I encourage you to stay tuned to 1340. Hopefully it will be on Wednesday. You'll see the full documentary, which is called Good Trouble. And then just a little bit, whoops, I've lost my pages now, about C.T. Vivian. C.T. Vivian, Martin Luther King's field general, dies at 95. The Reverend C.T. Vivian, an early civil rights organizer and field general for the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King and his Southern Christian Leadership Conference in the historic struggle for racial justice a half-century ago, died on Friday at his home in Atlanta. He was 95. Mr. Vivian was a Baptist minister and a member of Dr. King's inner circle of advisors, alongside Reverend Fred Shuttleworth, Reverend Wyatt T. Walker, Reverend Ralph Abernathy, and other civil rights luminaries. He was the national director of some 85 local affiliate chapters of the SCLC from 1963 to 1966, directing protest activities and training in nonviolence, as well as coordinating voter registration and community development projects. So again, you can go online and read his full obituary in the New York Times, which fills in a lot of the details. But I just feel it is so important. I'm so glad that Michelle and others of our administrators decided that this would be a good thing to do. So I'll hand it over now to Nora for some
Before
personal...
Nora, can I ask you a
Yes,
question?
Yes.
Could you say just a few more words about what you actually saw and did at the Selma March? What you
My particular role?
Yeah, and
Well,
how you saw John Lewis and other leaders at that point.
Well, I was a member of a group called the Medical Committee for Human Rights. And one of our main functions was sending groups of medical people, not all doctors, but medical people in general, to the South to act as a support to the civil rights movement in general. And that meant doing first aid, attending demonstrations, giving health education classes, investigating local health problems, local hospitals, local doctors. And so I was with a team that went on the Selma to Montgomery March. I was also in the preliminaries in Brown's Chapel in Selma. We did some first aid and some training there. And I probably met John Lewis for the first time in Brown's Chapel. There was always a meeting in the evening, and he would have addressed those meetings, as would C.T. Vivian. And then at the march itself, I was not in the leadership. We were in a van sort of following the march to give first aid if necessary. So I probably then saw him again. Once we got to Montgomery, there was a big rally in Montgomery, and all the leaders made speeches at that. So that's when I would have seen him again. And then after that, at various meetings in various churches throughout the South.
Before I turn to Nora, I just wanted to say that Joyce Sheffy had very much wanted to join. She has an amazing photograph of her grandson interviewing John Lewis, or John Lewis interviewing her grandson. Her grandson, she told me, asked Mr. Lewis if he was ever afraid when he went on his marches, and Lewis apparently replied, if you're true to your cause and you know where your heart is, you are not afraid. And so Joyce unfortunately had a medical appointment and couldn't join us. So let me turn to Nora, who has a completely different perspective of the time of the late 1950s and early 60s, that she was touring with the National Ballet of Canada in the South. And she toured right through these cities we're talking about, probably just a year or so or two before the first Freedom Rides. But you had a particular experience, and how the National Ballet of Canada had to adjust by disinviting some of your members to join.
Oh, yes, that's right. Yeah.
Oh.
Whoops. Whoops. I'll just wait till things get organized back again. Anyway, no, I'll just tell you. Yeah, I was a member of the National Ballet of Canada, and we toured the United States forever and ever and ever, and particularly in the South. And at that time, in 60, 61, we were not allowed to take our Japanese ballet dancer, a very fine young dancer who later became the lab tech in a very well-known television drama series, Quincy. So if you ever saw that, you'd see Robert as the lab tech. And another, a Jewish dancer was also forbidden a visa to come. So that was interesting. But so very briefly, we loved touring in the South for many reasons, packed houses, such great reception response. And we were in Florence, Alabama, Columbus, Georgia, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Birmingham, Alabama. And one particular date we had was in Grambling, Louisiana, the State University, which is a Black university. And we received tremendous welcome there, packed houses. We performed 2 nights. I think it was on our way there, either on our way to Grambling or on our way to Ruston, Louisiana, where where there is the Louisiana Tech University. But we were going to the Grambling, Louisiana State University. And I think we got lost. We were 2 big, Greyhound buses filled with dancers and musicians. And so we got lost in this backwoods area. And of course we had to have a bathroom stop as well. But we stopped by this little shack that 4 elderly men were selling fried mullet. And it was there that we stopped and they welcomed us. They were so happy to see us and talk to us. We got off the bus, we chatted to them. They gave us some of their fried mullet, which was delicious, and helped us to get on the right road to the university. We also, performed in the big cities, and we were told Florence, Alabama, Columbus, Lafayette, Baton Rouge, Lafayette, and Montgomery, and telling us you cannot walk alone on the streets. You have to go in a group. And that was something I loved to do. Every town or city I went to, I wanted to go out and walk around and see what was happening. So we couldn't do that. We saw the colored only cafes, lunchrooms, whites only. I had never seen anything like that, and neither had anyone else. And we weren't up on what was happening enough, anyway, politically, but we knew it was very important, and we were very happy to be there and performing. No problems in that area. We never had any incident or anything happen that was not of the most joyful, really, welcoming us. And certainly after the performance, people would gather around the stage door, and it was really excellent. And then all this was going on at the same time. So basically, those are some key memories of traveling in the South. But we loved it. We loved the South.
Can I just ask a question or two?
Yeah, yes.
So were the audiences either white or Black?
Oh no, certainly when we performed in Grambling in the State University, no Black audience, all.
Well, those are traditionally Black universities.
Oh, totally, absolutely.
No, what I meant was there were any places where the audiences were integrated?
I wish I
Probably
knew. I'm
not.
sure in Birmingham.
Probably not.
I'm sure in Birmingham, in Baton Rouge, probably. But, we didn't really look for colors of people. We were looking for reception and warmth and appreciation, which we got in spades. Oh, my goodness. Yeah.
Okay. Thank
Great.
you so much.
Oh, yeah,
That's
you're
great.
very welcome. Thank you. And thank June as well.
I think we probably come to an end in June, unless you have something else to add.
I would like to remind everybody, I'm hoping, look out for a sign on the screen or at the concierge desk. I am hoping that on Wednesday at 3:00, we will be able to show on 1340 this new documentary of John Lewis's life called Good Trouble. So keep alert and look out for that. Thank you.
And let me just end up by reading again the amazing statement where the expression good trouble comes from. Good trouble, what an amazing word, and describing this 80 years old life that has just passed by, and that we are all deeply, deeply grateful for his contribution to our country and to the world. Here's what he said: "Do not get lost in a sea of despair. Be hopeful, be optimistic. Our struggle is not the struggle of a day, a week, a month, or a year. It is the struggle of a lifetime. Never, ever be afraid to make some noise and get in good trouble, necessary trouble." And with those great words, we'll end this brief remembrance of John Lewis and C.T. Vivian. Thank you all.